All right, there we go. Well, thank you for joining us for this webinar, iTech Conference Speakers webinar series. Looking forward to all of our featured speakers at the fall conference this year. We have with us today Allison Schwab. Allison is a coach's wife and mom of 4 from Cedar Falls. She shares a passion for wrestling, photography, traveling, and advocacy. Their 6-year-old twins, Jenna and Lennon, are currently in kindergarten and were diagnosed with autism before they turned 2. Since then, Allison and her husband have worked tirelessly to provide them with every opportunity while exploring various therapies to ensure they are afforded the same opportunities as their older brothers. Allison and her husband are strong advocates for early intervention, inclusion, and the understanding, that the autism spectrum holds a range of possibilities. Allison began Every Piece Matters, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to provide communication tools for the community to create an environment that is inclusive to those with diverse communication needs. So thank you for joining us today, Allison. I'm going to kind of turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. So I want to talk today about supportive environments for autistic children. Obviously, this is a parent's perspective. I am not an educator, so you'll have to forgive me that my speaking skills and everything might be a little subpar compared to your colleagues. But so I'm just going to go ahead and start and kind of get into it since there's a lot to cover. And of course, I had to make it fun. So important to know that before we got here, I'm not a best-selling author or a teacher or an AEA rep or like an IEP guru. I'm just a parent who received an early diagnosis of autism with our twin girls and took every opportunity to use every tool provided so that we could ensure that they had every opportunity that that their older brothers had, and they could reach their full potential no matter what that looked like. And when our girls were diagnosed, that looked completely different than what it does right now. So I'm really just here to share some tools that we've learned, some things that have helped us that I'm hoping that will help you in your classrooms and creating an inclusive environment for all the kids. So this will be like your normal PowerPoint presentation. I try to keep it fun, but then also leave you with some tools that can help you this next year. So I think it's important to know that you don't know what you don't know, but once you do, it's on you to do better. And I probably was naive to think that I would know everything about autism because I still don't. I only know what I know and what is pertaining to our kids, and that looks a lot different than a lot of kids out there. So let's start out with, obviously, I'm Allison Schwab. I am Jenna and Lennon's mom. I had to leave this in here from a previous presentation because it just cracks me up. This is Jenna and Lennon, and it's like one of my favorite, memes of late was someone saying that they love to use the word like mild autism because, or someone says like mildly autistic because it's alluding to the fact that there's a spicy autism. And if you knew us and you've followed our family at all, we do have a spicy twin, and our spicier twin is Jenna, and we joke about it, but she is absolutely wonderful. She brings a lot of laughter to our family, and it just makes me think of that. And so I wanted to kind of go over, first take you through a background of like how our story began. It began in November of 2018. We had a 15-month checkup for the girls. They were born at 34 weeks and 6-7 days. We spent about 2 weeks in the NICU. I think that those things are important to say because one, they're asked on every questionnaire that I've ever filled out, including like AEA and anything else for their IEPs. And so they weren't developing speech right away how we thought that they should have. They weren't meeting the milestones of interaction. They were a little delayed on some other things. And so I began to kind of notice that, and having older kids, it definitely made me more aware. So went to their 15-week checkup. They kind of said, hey, let's wait till 18 months, or their 15-month checkup. They said, let's wait till 18 months. And when we went in for 18 months, they still were not speaking. So we weren't hearing like mama, dad, dad, nothing like that, just squeals. They had once said uh-oh and had lost it. So we had even actually seen like them lose some speech. We began speech while we waited on our turn to get into the U. There is a waiting list. So if you're unaware and you have a child in your classroom that maybe is going through the diagnosis process, just be aware that everything takes so much time. It takes a lot of months to get into the U. And then from then on, you walk out of there and you're kind of like, okay, what next? So we saw a medical doctor and a psychologist on March 27th in 2019. And that was actually pretty early that we were able to get in. And in that meantime, we had already been evaluated and were receiving services, speech services from Mercy One up here, as well as UNI, and they have their own speech clinic. And so we walked out there with a diagnosis of level 2 autism with accompanying global developmental delay and speech impairment. Our recommendation was ABA therapy and continued speech therapy, OT, PT, anything like that as needed that we could see. And so what we did is we resumed speech. We went back home. We kind of left there and had to make up our mind right then, like, okay, where do we go from here? My husband, if you know him, he's a wrestling coach, and he kind of like put his foot down and was like, okay, well, we're going to do everything that we can about it. And like, we're going to show them. And that was kind of like his attitude about it. And I probably ate a lot of snacks and kind of went that route first, and then dug into what was available to us and what was autism. So I want to bring up like, what is autism? Autism spectrum disorder is a developmental disability that can cause significant social, communication, and behavioral challenges. So it is a neurological disability. 1 out of 36 kids are on the autism spectrum, and that is even less than what we were told when we first went in. So in that time, it was like 1 out of like 52, and it's already dropped to 1 out of 36. Boys are 4 times more likely to be diagnosed with ASD. Girls are a lot of times missed because of the misrepresentation of autism and what that looks like. And we will be the first to tell you, since we've had our journey with autism, that it is hard to have a disability that sometimes is invisible. And so I hear a lot from people like, oh, I would never know your your twins are autistic, like they don't look autistic. And so your first thought is like, well, what does autism look like? And then you think back to any movie that you've ever seen, and you probably think of Rain Man, and you probably think of like a child in the corner that's not talking and not loving. And I can tell you that those are greatly misrepresentation of autism as a whole. And that's why it is a spectrum. So autism, possible signs, lack of eye contact, not pointing to objects, like to show interest. So my girls, for example, like they wouldn't, like if I said, look over there, or, they wouldn't look, and then they would never use pointing as a way to ask me for something, even when they weren't speaking. And developing children, neurotypical children typically do that. If they can't speak, then they point, they grab your hand, they bring you to an object, and our girls did not do that. They prefer not to be held or cuddled. Ours were quite the opposite. Ours were very loving. They seeked out a lot of touch. And so that was definitely something that kind of threw us off a little bit. Unaware of people talking to them or in the room, and they wouldn't respond. So they wouldn't respond to their name. I could go in and out of the room, and they might not even notice someone else walking into the room, because they were highly fixated on whatever they were doing. So we were really into puzzles and then they would interact with toys in like one way. So the shape sorter, they would collect all the shapes, put them in, and then dump them out, put them in, dump them out. And so when we went to be diagnosed, one of the things they did was to try to teach them how to sort. And they never wanted to sort or separate. They would just put them in, dump them out. Lining up things was another one. But our girls were huge on gross motor, and they would seek sensory input by jumping in their cribs. And when I say like jumping in their cribs, I mean to the point where like our crib mattresses were not used by other people because they were so like been jumped on. um, Autism, if you've met one autistic child, you've met one autistic child, and there's a reason why it's a spectrum. Our girls didn't show the typical signs, and so a lot of this could have been easily missed, or our pediatrician could have put it off and said, oh, wait, they're twins or they speak for one another. Like, let's just wait and see. So I'm super grateful that she didn't. She heard my concerns and we got them in as soon as possible to be evaluated. So I want to talk about some possible challenges for autistic individuals is social interactions. They're dealing with sensory sensitivities, flexibility with changes in routine, communication. Like I said, our girls were nonverbal. They had special interests and more of like a fixated interest on certain things. They struggled with emotional regulation. Part of that had to do with their lack of communication. We would see it play out through behaviors. Theory of the mind and motor skills. So they would just have socially, they would have difficulty, and we still see this now. They're getting ready to go into first grade. On picking up on sometimes like facial expressions or social cues. Typically, you know, our girls are 6, and when someone comes to our house, the first thing that they ask them is like, when are they leaving? And, you know, as an adult, you kind of like crack up because, you know, part of you is sometimes like probably wondering the same thing, but also it can come off as like rude. And so I would be very worried about that. And now I realize like our girls just want to know their schedule. They want to know what the rest of their day looks like. And so the best way for them to do that is to ask like, okay, so when are these people leaving? So that's something that we kind of saw. Um, they really kind of struggled with like organizing and like planning tasks, managing times, or like switching between activities. We would have to have a lot of visuals for them, a lot of their orders of their days, how they got ready during the day, first, then, and next. Being able to practice with AEA about how to move from like play to work and what that looked like. And so these are some things that you're going to see that they can be struggling with. Managing emotions and understanding others' feelings. So if they took something or they wanted something back, they just could not comprehend the other person's maybe struggle or why they wouldn't give it back, anything like that. So a lot of like functions of behavior that if you have done anything read about or shared or done a training on functions of behavior, that was super, super helpful for us. And I think that it actually would be helpful for any child and any parent to know the functions of behavior. And I kind of talk about it a little bit later. So I wanted to talk about early intervention. Everyone pushes for early intervention, but I want to make sure that you're aware of what early intervention really looks like for a parent. Now, not every parent is going to be able to do this. And I want to make sure that I showed our schedule, because the first thing that I was asked when we were diagnosed was what me and my husband did for a profession. And my husband is a coach, and so he's out of town a lot. So the next thing that they did was ask me like, well, what do you do? Knowing that someone would be responsible to take our girls to and from therapy, leave school early, pick up from therapy, go to another therapy. And parents that have 9-to-5 jobs, that's just not doable. Or maybe they're in a situation where they don't have a car or transportation. And so a lot of times I think we look at people and we say, well, why aren't they doing these things that you did? And they just may not have the means to do it. So I think it's important that you recognize and see what is actually available to those parents and what their capacity to carry out is. What ours actually looked like, which is intense, is for about 2 years old, they have their diagnosis. They did speech. They were still working with AEA, and they started ABA. I will note that ABA therapy is not for every child. You're going to run into everything. And in 5 years from now, I might have a different feeling about ABA. And that kind of goes with the, you know what you know, and then I'm trying to do everything and to help my child and give them the best opportunity, but also know that what works for my child might not work for others. In the fall of 2020, they were 3 years old, and their schedule kind of looked like ABA for about almost 2.5 hours in the morning, 5 days a week. They would go to special education preschool from like 11:30 to 1:50, 5 days a week. And then they would go to speech 2 to 3 times after that. So they're 3 and they're going through almost a, 6, 7 hour day of work that they're putting in. And in the meantime, you're also trying to do work or do things between the times that they're at therapy, and or you're getting parent training. ABA required parent training that we would come in and do and meet, and that would be an hour a week or every other week, so that you could try to work on some of the things at home and create a generalization across all environments. Fall of 2021, they're 4 years old. So we moved into a full inclusion preschool, and we would leave early from that and then go to 3 hours of ABA followed by speech twice a week. And then eventually we made it into kindergarten. This our past year. They would go to school from 8:45 to 3:30. I would pick them up, and then they would attend 2 hours of ABA therapy before they came home. They did have a one-on-one para at the school and receive speech services as well as at the school. So by the time that we reached kindergarten, we had put in like 3 years of ABA therapy, averaging about 15 hours a week. And we had put in hundreds of speech sessions between Mercy One and UNI. None of this was like considering the work that we were doing at home, and the mental load that parents carry that have a child with special needs. And I think it's really important to say that, because we also have 2 other kids that are not on the spectrum that are 8 years older and are involved in sports. And, we want to be a part of whatever they're doing. And so it consumes a lot of time. So obviously I'm here to talk about creating inclusive environments within the classroom. I want to talk about the role of the educator. Do the expectations of the classroom match up with the developmental levels within it? Is LRE, or least restrictive environment, like the best environment? And practical tools to use within the classroom, as well as fostering an inclusive environment among peers. And I will say again, like, this is from a parent's perspective. So know that in education, I know that it has to do with funding, budget, staffing, all of those things. So in a perfect world, obviously we would have amazing salaries for you guys and everything that you do. You would have paraeducators in every room and so on. So let's talk about the role of the educator first. You are their first introduction to the education system. So you are the key in creating an environment to give these kids a positive experience. I actually had a friend's child that was at another school system, not ours, and they began preschool. They had self-contained rooms, and they were kind of working to move all the kids to general education classrooms. However, her child was at a base level of an 18-month developmental level, getting ready to go into, all of a sudden, with no prep, a general education classroom of 16 students, 4 kids with IEPs, a general education teacher with a special education teacher that would be moving from classroom to classroom to get in their minutes. So as you can imagine, it ended up being quite a really hard start for her, and they ended up having to pull the child. She immediately pulled away and kind of barricaded herself between like a couch and a furnace or an air conditioner, because they had started singing and it was too much for her. And it wasn't to any it wasn't the teacher's fault. It wasn't the parents' fault. It was kind of like a not prepared thing that happened. And so it's just an example of everything and how everyone needs to work together between our special education teachers, AEA reps, people that are writing our IEPs, and everyone to create an environment. So things as small as sending a note home, like it starts before you bring the kids in your classroom. One of the notes that we've seen go home that says like, we will learn to use our words. And For a child that doesn't have words verbally, it can be really anxiety driven for a parent to know that that's like what the expectation is as their kid's getting ready to go into this classroom that they have never even entered yet. Okay. So something that you would kind of maybe change that to is we would be learning different ways to communicate, something to that effect, or we will be learning different ways others communicate, so that you start to build this an environment that's already being accepting of all forms of communication. Okay, so in the autistic community, a big one is referring to a child as saying Jenna has autism. Everyone has been taught person first, right? The difference is though, is that autism is not a disease. It's not something that they have and can necessarily get rid of. It's a part of them. So you'll want to change that language. And this is coming from autistic individuals to saying Jenna is autistic, and in referring to the autistic community, not people that have autism. And I still catch myself, right? Because that's something that we were taught growing up, is that you're looking at that person, as a person first and then whatever else, except for autism is an adjective. So it's a way that describes them. So they're autistic. So saying like that she has autism implies that it can be caught. It can be imply like a negative meaning, and then it can already create seclusion without even meaning to. So I think that's something to note. Assume competence always, especially with your children that you have that are nonverbal. Just because they can't speak verbally to you does not mean that they do not comprehend what is going on. An autistic individual, even if they are delayed, doesn't mean that you speak in front of them like they're a baby. You literally speak to them and speak in front of them as if you would any neurotypical child, or any other adult. So I think that's super important. It's easy to say, oh, well, this person's not doing this, and speak over them. They can hear and understand everything that you're saying. Our girls' receptive language was completely higher than their expressive always, and still is to this date. Collaborating with the parents with the and other therapies is huge. So parents, just like the kids, are going to vary. Some will not know any different and to have looked for outside resources for their child before getting into early education or getting early education involved. Some may still be in denial or not willing to accept that their child needs extra help. Some may just not have the means to get their child to and from outside resources. And so it's really important that you know and start to build a rapport with the parents and a relationship with them. I always say if you can build a relationship with the parents, the more the child is going to be able to thrive, because you will have a way to like implement routines, changes, and new tactics across the environments. The more you can know about the background before their child comes into school, if a home visit is available, a phone call, a meeting with AEA or past teachers, even outside of like an IEP meeting, the more prepared you're going to be to serve the needs of the child. And that's really what we're here for. So to continue on, the role of the educator, like preparing the child like an earlier visit. So the best thing that our school did here, we go to Cedar Heights Elementary in Cedar Falls. And the best thing that our educators did and our teachers were is they invited us in early. So before back to school night, which I know is coming up for a lot of you guys, we were able to come in, we were able to meet their paras. We were able to explore the classroom thoroughly, even how loud the toilet flushes. And it's something that you do not think about. It is something that barely my kids could handle at the beginning of the school year, and is going to cause anxiety knowing that if they have to go in there and it's that loud, maybe then they don't want to go in there, and you start to see bathroom behaviors change, etc. As the paras engaged with our kids, I was able to share anything with the teachers that I felt would help make the transition better. I provided noise counseling headphones for lunch assemblies, or just the first couple of days my girls wore it, because they were going from a preschool where they were, we're coming off of COVID. We're coming off of preschool rooms where they are eating in a classroom with maybe at most 15 other peers, to a full cafeteria. And I know you guys know how loud that can be. We took a picture of each teacher, and printed and laminated like a visual schedule so that they already had an idea of what their day would look like. You know, mom would drop them off, they would meet their para or teacher at the door, and who was picking them up. So if they had that sense of what's going to happen next, they could look on their backpack and we just attached it. Now, is every parent going to laminate pictures and everything? No, but it is a tool that you can say like, hey, can we provide you with visual aids? Would that help your child before they get into the classroom? Other things are if a para or a teacher would be sick, our teacher would try to let us know as much as they knew ahead in advance. Even if that was a message real quick in the morning saying, hey, just so you know, Mrs. Smith won't be here today. Lennon's going to be with, you know, Mrs. Rhea, and this is her name. This is what she looks like. So I had the opportunity to show Lennon who she was going to be, and it wasn't, and prepare her for that change before we reached the school. One of the most consistent things across most autistic children in my experience is that they need to see what's ahead, what is next, how many tasks until lunch. Having a visual schedule in your room or at their desk relieves anxiety. Both of my daughters can get stuck in a circle of questions and caused by like not knowing what's next and what's to come. So they will continually ask questions to me, the same question over and over and over until they get a firm answer. The way my girls function is everything's like a little bit more black and white. So words like in a little bit or wait or soon, they just don't carry much weight. They're going to come back and ask me and say, well, when, how many minutes? They want direct answers and like a firm time. So as much as that you can provide for them, that will help. Also, we want to address like sensory needs. We all STEM in one way or another. So it's important to get feedback from the parents as to what best helps the child. We brought a mini trampoline for our girls to bounce on in the hallway. So it was available to any child that needed it. And it just sat back in the kindergarten wing and out of the way, obviously, of like fire drills and all the things. But if our girls required a break or they were able to go out to the trampoline and bounce for like a minute or two to kind of get the wiggles out, they were able to take a walk around the school. And obviously, this is going to be dependent on the child. Later in the year, we would start to reevaluate what those breaks looked like and what was needed. And what I mean by that is like, we started to begin to realize that like when Lennon struggled at something, she would ask for a break. She's a little bit of a perfectionist. And so when something overwhelmed her, like writing, then she would ask for a break. And so then we sat down and kind of figured out different ways to approach that and how to get her to try something and then take the break. I think it's really important that I sat on a panel with two autistic individuals that are now in their college years. They were diagnosed later. And one of the things that stood out to me was a boy who would doodle, and he would doodle, and that is what would give him, like, that was his stemming, and that would be able to give him enough movement and everything to focus on what the teacher was saying. However, the teacher thought that the child was not paying attention. So when they would make them stop doodling, the kid lost all interest and all focus on what the teacher was saying. So I think it's important to get to the base of like why they're doing what they're doing and not just creating something else for them to do or not addressing it at all or telling them to stop. It could be the thing that's helping them focus on what it is to not be a distraction in the classroom or not be distracted by what is going on in the classroom so they can focus on you. Our girls sat kind of like at the back of the carpet at circle time. This is obviously lower, elementary, but they did have fidget toys available, and that did change as the year went on. So maybe it started out that they were in like a cube chair or sitting with like a puppet, and then if that became too distracting, then they would move towards something else as the year went on. In the classroom, if an autistic child walked into your classroom or a child with a communication challenge, sensory needs, like what would you have available to them? Inclusion is no longer about just bringing the child into the environment, but finding ways to create opportunities for that child to interact within the environment to the best of their ability, not just to the amount that we allow. It's no different than offering enough space for a wheelchair to be able to come in. It's the same as for a child that can't communicate. Do you have other ways for that child to communicate with you? Do you have communication boards? Do you have picture cards, visual schedules? All of those can be things that create a huge difference in your classroom to begin with. Is there books about differences and kindness? And is that something that you pick up and start at the beginning of the year and talking about kids that, maybe have different needs in the classroom instead of just avoiding it or not bringing light to it? Kids want to know, and they typically do a better job once they know what's going on. They're going to ask anyways. They're going to ask, why does this person only come in, or why do they leave at a certain time, or why do they have help? So it's better to address it right on. My kindergarten teacher said some of the best things that she's had experiences has been parents that have came in and read a book or talked about their child. We did not do this. We actually sent in a book about differences, but she had a child that was blind, and the parent brought in goggles for the kids to put on to stimulate what it was like for that child, and to give them a way to experience it, so they understood as close as they could to what that child was going through. The more that our kids are exposed early on, the less shocking it is later on. So like, oh, he uses an iPad to talk. Like, oh yeah, he's always used an iPad to talk since we were little. Like, there's no difference. And showing kids how to embrace differences and interact with them, it creates empathy. And we could probably all use a little bit more of that in this world. So other things to think of is, like, as a educator, have you looked into AAC devices? Do you know if a child brings one in, are you able to, now I know everyone's differently, but are you able to at least know what that is and possibly how they're going to use it to communicate? When we were in preschool, our girls did use speech devices, and we came in ahead of the other kids so that our teachers could see what they were like, what was most used from our kids to express their needs. Or do you have a low-tech communication board? One similar to this that is like a visual schedule. I might have to take the blur off so that you can be able to see that. So like a visual schedule, but this is like a PEX communication board. It's front and back. It's actually specific for younger elementary or pre-K. We give these for free, and there's a lot of printable resources on the internet. I know that you're already probably printing a lot of your own stuff anyways. So what's one more, right? But do you have those things available before a child with autism, or an autistic child, or a child with a disability comes into your classroom? You can say what you want about COVID. I'm not going to go there, what was right or wrong or whatnot, but we are seeing kids that are not meeting milestones, and we do not need to move the milestone. Okay. We need to figure out how we're able to help these kids continue on, because stretching out the milestone is only going to delay their help, and it's only going to delay the results from early intervention. Okay, so if we move on to past all the things that you guys have to do as educators, I want to talk a little bit about LRE, or least restrictive environment, inclusion in like the child's experience. So if we're not for the child, then like, who are we for? Okay, if we cannot meet the needs of set forth by the IEP within a LRE environment, then why are we pushing for LRE? Okay, there is absolutely no way our kids would be able to have withstood an environment of 16 kids, 4 with IEPs, and that be their first introduction to the education system. Our kids had to really work hard on things like wearing things on their heads. So being able to give the actual opportunity to wear headphones and bring headphones and use those in the educational like environment. So I think sometimes people are like, oh, well, we can give them headphones or we can put them in a quiet area. It still doesn't mean that that kid's going to be able to tolerate that. They actually have to build up the tools to be able to be in that environment. And so I gave the example of the child that, developmentally was 18 months and then put into this general education classroom. If we don't have the staff to help too, then we're actually like hurting both sides of it, right? We're hurting the kids that have the IEPs that are not being met, and we're hurting the general education kids because they're not being pushed. And so, and I know that that's something that sometimes it's just you're working with what you have. But if you can figure out a way to be able to do both, you'll probably run the world, but also it would be a great experience for these kids. But I am a fan of inclusion, obviously, but I do not think that it comes at a cost of completely taking away our self-contained rooms and putting these children in an environment that they are not prepared for. And what you're going to see is when a mismatch happens between the developmental level and the expectations of the environment that they are in. There's a big discrepancy between this, and either a teacher is going to spend all their time with the child with a developmental delay, or the child's IEP is not going to be met, and or the other students are going to be not given the same amount of time either. So it's something that each classroom, each student, each teacher is going to have to work through. But I think that by creating an environment where the child has tools to withstand moving into that general education classroom is going to be huge. And that general education classroom already being prepared for that child. And so some of the things that you possibly could see are going to be like resistance and behaviors, anxiety and frustration, withdrawal, and a loss of motivation. And this is not just neurodivergent children. This is also neurotypical children that you're going to see, and you're going to see a withdrawal from your neurotypical children that maybe aren't being pushed. So I think it's important that we play both sides of that. I don't think that there's a one size fits all. Okay. If we believe that inclusion is not just a physical placement within the environment, but a feeling created by those with the person within the environment. And this is why so important para-educators are huge. I know that the teaching staff agrees with me. I know that their support staff is a huge addition to their classroom, but it's also unfair for us to put para-educators in a place where they do not given the proper training before they go in there. I substituted as a para-educator a couple of times, and I came in, I was given maybe barely any information about the child and was just put with the child. So I can't even imagine how scary that is to the child themselves. Is here's a new person in their environment that doesn't know anything about them, how they communicate, and what their likes or dislikes, and we're not giving any sort of kind of like background on it. I think that we not, I would say as a whole, some places do a poor job of being able to offer education. I know other places do a great job of being able to offer education to their para-educators. But I know that these paraprofessionals, they want the education. That is the feedback that I'm getting directly from them in the school system, is that they want education on these topics and how to be more helpful and how to handle different situations. So I try to like think of like each of our senses, and especially when it comes to like sensory processing disorder, and see how your classroom adds or takes away from their experience. So being in a really bright space, maybe a really loud space, you just have to imagine that everything is heightened. So they have, for instance, like the humming of the heater. That is something that maybe an autistic child, like they're going to pick up on, and other children are able to block out. So it's really important that we look at all parts of things that can happen, and be willing to provide like appropriate support services so that that child can have as close to the same opportunities as the other children in the room. I think that it's important that you guys, as educators, are able to look at sensory seeking versus sensory sensitivity. One way is to foster a more inclusive environment is knowing if the autistic child is sensory seeking or sensory sensitive. And what I mean by that is you can see on this chart the difference. And I know it's going to take time. And obviously, you guys have a million things that you're already doing and trying to tackle, but this is something that you can kind of learn about, because neurodivergent children or autistic children are not the only ones that are sensory seeking and sensory sensitive. These can be any kids, and it can be any type of time of day. Being able to keep a track of their day, our girls, their para kept a notebook that came home with them, and we were able to see if certain times of days were more triggering than others. So we learned that, right after lunch was maybe a time where they really couldn't do really focused work right then. Or maybe they were already knew that recess was coming up, and that's what they were focused on, was to be able to go outside. Uh, Maybe a good sensory experience is like doing small group or sensory table activities, being able to have things available to the kid, like Play-Doh, our kids had a thing of Play-Doh at their desk, so that if they just needed to mold something with their hands or feel something, they were able to do that. And it wasn't distracting, or wasn't a something that took away from the other kids' experience. And being able to address this as a whole, like by turning off lights at certain times, or being able to let kids experience different fabrics or blankets. I know sometimes we have like reading corners. One of the things that was huge to our kids as they were growing up, like through this, was we would use a huge like tote, like think I don't even know, like 64-gallon tote, bigger or whatnot. And our girls, we would put pillows in it, and our girls would sit inside it. And it was enough for them to like just feel close. They wanted to feel that proprioceptive input and that pressure on their body. And that's how they would read their book. So I've seen teachers that have had that in their classroom, and they just kind of made it as like a reading boat. And they would have like a pillow, maybe like a comfy blanket in there. And then when kids were able to go to centers or have a reading center, that kid could jump in there and get comfy and like settle in for their book. And just being able to have that tightness was able to give them enough feel and enough focus to be able to focus on their book. So enough stimulation to be able to focus on their book. Other tools within the classroom is like what could be helpful to create an inclusive environment. So you need to be able to be looking at all things considered, and starting with like their communication. How many might you serve a child in the classroom who struggles to communicate? We have visual aids, communication boards, AAC knowledge, like with speech device. Sign language or visual phonics. A total communication approach is also explained to others, like how to communicate with them. So it's important that we were able to use sign language, verbal cues, as well as their speech device. And those are all the different ways, as well as pictures, that our girls communicated before they were able to fully verbalize sentences, their needs, and their wants. And being able to tell other kids in the classroom, like, oh, this is Jenna's speech device, and this is how she speaks to us, and introducing that. So do you have like headphones available? We never really figured out some days why it was more stimulating than others in the classroom, why they needed it. But there are other days that they could not go without their headphones. And I think if any of you guys are parents, then like at the end of the day, and I know that I know moms and dads alike can relate to this, and you guys have had a ton of stimulation once you get home from your day classroom with the kids. And sometimes that maybe we lose our cool a little bit early. And it's not really that you're angry, you're just been overstimulated. Well, our kids are no different than that. We make such a big deal about stimming and sensory seeking and sensitivities when really we all have it and we all do it and we all need that space to kind of get away. So recognizing that they are just a tinier form than us, except they don't have the tools to be able to regulate that and to be able to maybe say their wants and needs, like, hey, I need to just be in a quiet space for a little bit. Like, do you tap your feet or your legs? Do you chew on your nails or pick at them? Do you chew gum throughout the day? Do you play with your hair or rock back and forth when you sit? Do you love to listen to things while you work? And like, do you love to, like, to squeeze like the stress balls? These are all examples of how we stem and how they stem, but we tend to take that away from them, thinking it's going to be a distraction in the classroom. And think if how maybe you work better with having music on. Well, that child might be able to listen to you better by doodling at the same time. So I think it's important to just recognize that. Different ways to sit at circle time. Like, do you offer maybe cushions or cube chairs, flexible seating options, fidget items available, Play-Doh to squeeze or poppets? Do you have a way to let them move around, meaning take a break from an activity, a brain break? We do those all the time on YouTube, or the brain breaks, a task that they can do. Maybe it's something during the day that they're able to take to the office to be able to give that movement and give them that space to kind of get away from the classroom when things get hard or loud, or it's a triggering time for them. As the routine changes and events come up, do you have visual aids or social stories available to them? So we would let them know when a field trip was coming up. We would let them know when maybe somebody was coming to visit the classroom ahead of time. For your older kids, planners and tasks lists, they are great for routine and organizing just their brain and like what comes next, because it's not, they're not able to maybe do that on their own. And I know my own 14 and 15-year-old benefit a lot from having a list given to them, and they are not autistic. So it works across the board. So coming into the last couple of things, we're fostering an inclusive environment. And the way that we do this, we can't view it only from the perspective of what the autistic child has to gain from being in the inclusive environment, but also what the neurotypical peer has to gain from being from like their inclusion in the general education setting. Some of those things are like empathy and understanding. Interacting with atypical peers can foster empathy and deeper understanding of the challenges that they face, and it's firsthand experience to lead to a greater sensitivity and a more compassionate perspective. Being able to allow them to experience different perspectives exposes neurotypical individuals to a wider range of viewpoints, and it kind of challenges their assumptions about what is normal and what's typical. Flexibility and adaptability and problem solving skills. So maybe they're not able to socialize the same or be able to say the same thing to a neurotypical peer as they would like an atypical peer, or vice versa. And it's important for them to be able to also adapt, because we're having these kids that are autistic adapt to everything in our world, right? Everything that is written pretty much from the standpoint of inclusion is coming from a neurotypical person. And so being able to invite that autistic perspective in is huge. And it's really important to the autistic community. Other things would be like problem solving, how they are working to include that peer, and what that looks like. Being able to, for your neurotypical peers to be able to use the communication boards, even outside on the playgrounds or in the classroom, to communicate with their peers, and showing them that they can do it, and they can use it, even though just as easy as it is for them to verbalize their needs and wants. You enhance social skills, you reduce stigma and stereotyping, and it creates that environment at a really young age that they're just different in the way that they learn or the way that they speak, but it doesn't mean that they're any less than anyone else in the classroom. It also provides advocacy and allyship. So, like witnessing the challenges that these peers face and the work that they put in, these other kids are able to become advocates for them. And that's going to carry them through their older years, through older elementary and older junior high and high school. And it's going to cause them to like push for inclusivity and promoting accessible spaces, pushing for equal opportunities for them. And it's going to help these people or the other kids like work on their own personal growth and how they feel and building a stronger community. And just like they say like you need all parts of like a community, right? Like if we're all the same, like then you miss out on those unique perspectives. You miss out on this whole world. Like I learned so much that I did not know prior to having an autistic child. There's so much more I'm aware of from a disability standpoint, just how far a person has to walk to reach a ramp at like a college. Like I challenge you the next time that you're on a college campus and you're trying to get into a building that has stairs, see what a person that's in a wheelchair, where they have to go, how much more time they have to allow for them to be able to just attend. And that's just the beginning of it. Other things are like books on diversity, disabilities, being kind, different communication tools, conversations about autism and sensory processing and how that might affect those in the classroom, activities so that others can experience challenges others may face. One of the things I absolutely loved this year was I heard that a school district did a week of commitment to autism in the month of April, which is Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month. But they did things like they had kids wear like PJs or comfy clothes to bring awareness that like sometimes people have a sensory sensitivity to clothing. They let them do other things like wear all the colors of the rainbow, representing that it's a full spectrum, that it's not just what it looks like is just one way. So I think that the more that you can incorporate those things throughout your school, the better. Other things to think of is I wish more people would study like the functions of behavior. And what that is like why kids are reacting or doing the things that they do. So what happened before they acted out or whatever the behavior was, whatever happened before that, what are repeating triggers? And so whatever they did, were they trying to like get attention? Were they trying to get something, maintain something, or escape something? So the best example I know is from my own house is if a child is trying to get out of something and I put them in timeout, they just got out of whatever they were trying to get out of, right? So knowing more about that would help at any level and any child. Parents sharing, that was the big thing I talked about with the kindergarten teacher, the parent that came in and brought the goggles that simulated blindness so that people would know what's going on and what that blind child felt like. Things like, does your outside of the classroom would be like library, does your library hold books on all of these things, diversity, disabilities, being kind, different communication tools? And that might be something that you need to look into and foster and how much we're doing that, right? Like we might be researching different birds and animals. And I know that that's a research project, but like, are we researching different ways people communicate? Like guidance, lessons on kindness, social skills, allyship, and diversity, bringing it into the classroom and talking about it. Having communication boards throughout the school. We do have those available for PE rooms, classrooms, and playgrounds, and we offer them at no charge through our nonprofit for Every Piece Matters. It's something that you can email us and you can ask us for as many boards as you want. And as long as we have the funding for it, we will give them to you. And if we don't have the funding for it, I will go find the funding for it because we want that to be able to be available to all kids. And that's not just kids that have a communication struggle, kids that are coming from maybe a really hard background at home, a really hard situation, they have trouble just explaining their feelings, right? And I know that some educators have feeling cards like, hey, how can you just show me what you need today? Can you just show me how you're feeling today? This is no different. It's just more expansive version of that. The week about autism, visuals around the school, preparing like for and not because of kids. So preparing for any child and inclusion, not just because you have an autistic child coming in. A calming space or room, think weighted blankets, low lighting, or a quiet spot if it gets too much for a child. And this is not just those with autism, but any kid that maybe has a sensory processing disorder or is just struggling. Some other things to note are inclusion works best when the administrators are supportive, good communication and collaboration are between home and school. My teachers have received specialized training, including paras that work side by side with them. Students progress is documented and maintained, and peers are educated. And that would be an absolute perfect world, wouldn't it? So I know that a lot of that is really hard to happen, but there's still a lot of that can be happen. You know, it can be a supportive administrator that is not able to give every classroom a para, but the ones that they do are able to get extra instruction, right? And it's available to them. Other things to note is find autistic people to learn from. So yes, I can speak on this from a parent's perspective, but I cannot speak on this from an autistic perspective. An autistic individual's brain is feeling, thinking all the things all at once. My favorite thing I just learned was common sense to you is not common sense to them, because common sense to us is leaving out about 5 steps. And for them, common sense would be following all the steps. So when you say, oh, it's just common sense, like, no, I mean, what are all the steps that involve that? So autistic is an adjective, just to reiterate that. The label didn't change my child. It actually helped them receive the help that they needed. And so I know that sometimes it's like, oh, we don't want to label them. Well, actually, the label is what saved us. It really saved us as a family. It saved me as a parent. Now, does that mean that I go around and constantly tell Jenna and Lennon that they're autistic? No, but it afforded me the help that I needed and that they were able to receive. Always assume competence. And just like you wouldn't talk about a neurotypical peer in front of them, don't talk about an autistic individual in front of them. Lastly, is our advocacy work. Every Piece Matters is our nonprofit. Our mission is to provide communication tools to communities to create an environment that is inclusive to those with diverse communication needs. That is a large communication board that they're holding. They're vinyl. They hang on playgrounds. We've had people drill them into walls. We've had people hang them in gyms. Every which way, we are working on developing one that is for adults, and also one is that we're our mini boards that we offer, which I showed earlier. These can be carried to and from specials, so it's fabulous. Kids that do not have speech devices, it took us twice that we were turned down by insurance before we were able to get our speech device. The other thing to note is that the trial period for a speech device, a lot of times you have to give back the trial before you get your speech device. So we've taught the kids how to communicate, and then we just took away their communication. So it's very important. These are free. Again, I will mail you as many as you need. They are available on Talk to Me Technologies is who we work with. They have absolutely wonderful worked with us. We have worked with you and I to foster this mini board so that it is from working with a speech language pathologist to develop this. So it's not something that I developed. I went to the teachers and said, what do you need? And I went to the speech pathologist and said, how can we put this in a way that kids can understand? It's not overwhelming to them. And then we try to put these in your hands so that you know that you have something, even if it's to say their feelings. This has everything from yes, no, hello, goodbye, to all the wants, make, put, wash hands, teacher, parent, everything you could possibly need. If we don't learn the way that we teach, if they don't learn the way that we teach, then we teach the way that they learn. And I think that's really important to say. And it's really important for these kids to hear, is that you're willing to come to them and meet them where they are. Lastly, one example that I thought was the most powerful example of what I've learned is an autistic child. It's like if you were to take a book and you went and read at the park and you sat down and you're reading and someone came up to you and they said, let's go play. And you said, well, I want to read. And they said, let's go play. This is what it's like when you interrupt an autistic individual and they're focused on whatever they're doing. Instead, if we have a book and we sit down with them and we say, oh, what are you reading? I'm reading a book too. And we meet them in their world instead of constantly trying to have them join ours. So I know I went over time. I'm sorry. And you
No,
probably
that's you so much
like,
good information. I mean,
I
I
was
took a
trying to
ton
like
of notes.
speed talk at the end.
I think one of the things, and if anybody has any questions, you can definitely throw them in the chat. I think one of the things I really enjoyed you saying is like, you've met one autistic child, you've met one autistic child. That whole idea of, I think we see this a lot with ADHD, with dyslexia, so many other things where we get this caricature understanding in our heads that gets stuck and we don't really go beyond that. And that happens a lot just because maybe people aren't aware, they don't get the experience. I think that's just an important thing to come back to again and again. And I really liked how you said that. A lot of the other things. I know like I said, I wrote down a lot of notes. So, that's a good thing. If anybody has any questions for Allison, Carrie just commented, fantastic to hear from a parent's perspective. I think that's always the important thing too. I think it's that personal touch. I think it's, we have a lot of teachers who only see it from their side. They're not always able to see it from the other side. Well, I want to thank you for sharing today. I know for everybody attended, everybody's watching this later. Of course, we're going to have Allison back at the fall conference in October. So really looking forward to that. The schedule should be released hopefully shortly so everybody can see that. I'm going to hit stop recording.